You are now listening to For All Nerds Show, a podcast about geek and pop culture from the perspective of people of color. For All Nerds is hosted by DJ Ben Amin and Tatiana Keene-Jones. For All Nerds Show is a member of the Loudspeakers Network, where we always say rest in peace to our founder, Combat Jack.
For All Nerds Show is powered by our listeners. Everything we do, from our podcasts, live events, our website, are all independently funded. Please continue to support us through our Patreon page at patreon.com/forallnerds. Welcome to For All Nerds.
And what's up, y'all? And welcome to another episode of the For All Nerds Show. The voice of Urban Geek, the podcast where we discuss geek and pop culture from the perspective of people of color. And as always, in the captain's chair, it's your boy, DJ Ben Amin, a.k.a. Scott Stunners, Professor Next, Sebastian Shaw Brother, the Off-White King, Mr. Finisher, R.I.P. to Mr. C. Thank you for joining us here in the spaceship. Usually I'd be introducing my partner, Tatiana Kane, but she ain't here tonight. She's off on a special secret mission, helping rebuild Genosha. So, I am joined by two illustrious guests. And first off, let me introduce our one and only doctor in the house tonight. I don't think Ron, has achieved that one just yet. So, Dr. Drea, please let the people know where you are from and who you are tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Dr. Drea here, a.k.a. more ethical than Professor X, a.k.a.
That's a low bar.
Truth, facts, a.k.a. Magneto apologist, a.k.a. Just processing all the trauma from the last several episodes. From the Arkham Sessions, another podcast all about superheroes and comics. So delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And, you're the doctor, you're the therapist. So how are you the one processing the trauma right now? We brought you here to help us.
Oh, I'm hanging on.
All right, we'll get to that. We also have Ron from POC Culture in the building. Please let the people know who you are.
Yes, sir. Ben, Dr. Drea, nice to see you guys again. Happy to be here. Got to give my AKAs, Jubilation, leave me at home. Jubilation, lean back, like way back over there. Jubilation, left behind, not doing anything. And wow. AKA, your shirt, Ben, Magneto is right. Yes, sir.
We got to get you one of these, Dr. Drea and Ron. We're about to start pumping these out from forallnerds.com, which will be back online very soon. So make sure you check it. We'll let you know. And this will be one of the new designs that will be debuting on there. So,
courtesy of you. I asked you before the show, who designed the shirt? Courtesy of Ben himself. I love it. I
happen to do this one. I will take credit for that. Thank y'all very much. So, yeah, y'all be able to get this on forallnerds.com very soon.
Looks good.
Magneto is right. Had to let him know one more time.
Period.
So, yeah.
Period. We're all on the same page.
Pretty much. And the crazy thing is I had a Magneto was right shirt back when Morrison first dropped that line in the X-Men comic. I've been on that wave. And this was before, I wore it to the mall one day, and my mom and one of her friends, my mom especially, was like, I don't know if that's the shirt you wear to the mall if you're, looking to meet women and stuff, and I was like, it is.
That's how you find the right one.
And that's what my mom's friend said. She was like, well, he's just looking for his tribe, and those who know will recognize it.
That's how you know.
I did not find my tribe back then.
How else will you know that it's right?
Well, yeah, it was wrong back then, but it worked out eventually. So, one can't be mad at how it all works out because we're good now. We're here now. We're back on For All Nerds to talk about X-Men 97, as y'all know from all of our X-Men related AKAs. And of course, you already pressed play and you know what you're here for. So, this is episode number 6 out of 10. There are now only 3 left. This episode is titled Bright Eyes, which is a reference to, from the comics, several characters. Cable, of course, is usually referred to as Bright Eyes because of his eye. Gambit, at some points, has also been referred to as Bright Eyes because of his eyes. And it's just a common phrase that comes up in X-Men comics a lot. Like, My Friend and Wonderbar, whenever Nightcrawler's around, or any bad, I don't know, colloquialisms from various languages. I don't know what you call those that Chris Claremont loved to pepper his speech with, like how Rogue always says sugar and ma. Yeah.
By the way, Ben, I think we're on episode 7. 7 is Bright Eyes.
Oh, you're right. My counting is bad. It's 8, 9, and 10 is left, which are the.
Well, you might have emotionally erased one episode like all of us did. It never happened. We're still in denial.
It's so funny. Today when I was rewatching this episode, so I was scrolling through Disney Plus, and it's like episode 5 comes up, and I was like, "Fuck, they really did that." Like. Today again, and it's like, remember it, it's the title, so it's always like, yeah, remember when we did that to your soul. So yeah, we're here on episode 7, Bright Eyes, which ain't very bright. I want to defer to my guest tonight, and how did y'all feel about this episode?
We're speechless.
Yeah.
Well, I had a number of reactions. 2 things come up for me. One is that they packed so much into this episode. After each scene, I thought, okay, this must be the end of it. And then something else would happen. And then a new villain showed up. Like, so many things happened in this jam-packed episode. I was actually impressed because it didn't feel schlocky. It all had meaning. This is totally unrelated. I'm watching Shogun. I've not finished the last episode of Shogun. But similar feelings of like, oh my gosh, that was so much. That must be the last scene of this episode, and then there's more and more. So it's definitely a testament to the writing that they're able to fill so much into this this short episode. The other thing is certainly what stands out for me as a psychologist is we're seeing some very real reactions, different reactions to the traumatic losses that happened over the last, actually, episode 5, right? So we're seeing now how everyone is reacting, responding, processing the loss of 2 characters, but one character in particular, Gambit, and then the loss of thousands of people on Genosha. And that really wasn't, it wasn't lighthearted. It wasn't indirect. It was not subtle. It was confronted. And that's, that was hard to watch. It was truly emotional. And it's weird to say I enjoyed it because it was so emotional. But it really, there was a moment that we'll talk about probably soon that kind of brought me to tears a little bit, but those are my 2 big reactions.
There were several moments that almost brought me to tears, but we'll get to them. Ron, how'd you feel about the whole episode?
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's a lot going on. I mean, if there's one word that can describe this series, it's probably that it's ambitious. Much like Shogun. Shogun is a very ambitious show as well, and I respect the writers and the creators behind this series. They've packed it full of everything from references to the past show, Easter eggs that comic fans will love, and they don't pull any punches. I think, like Dr. Drea said, they really, episode 5 was traumatic. Like they made sure it was traumatic to the viewers and the characters, and we're dealing with that. I mean, I will say that sometimes I do feel it's a lot that, especially if you're not steeped in the lore of like X-Men comics and stories, that characters like pop in and out, and like Emma Frost, for example. We see her, and now she's like the Diamond, and it's like, but if you don't really actually know who she is, if you're more of a casual fan or just like an even new viewer, I feel like a lot of the characters who come in and they die or they do this and that, it seems a little overwhelming from a storytelling perspective. And like Dr. Drea said, there's a new villain, Bastion, and he has a whole backstory. We know from comics what his storyline is, which is itself convoluted. Like the X-Men comics are pretty convoluted, but I think it's fun, and I definitely enjoy it. But I also can see that it's not something that if I was sharing with like like my wife who doesn't read comics or anything like that, I think she would have dropped by now. I think it would have been a little too much for her to be able to like keep up.
Oh man, I disagree. I've been watching with someone and they don't, and nothing. And beyond, my what I told them and watching the MCU and all that, they've never read an X-Men comic and have never seen most of the original show, and they love it. And I think the ratings on, Rotten Tomatoes, etc., would also say that. I think I get what you're saying. Things that it's one of those shows that rewards people who don't, who have read everything, and have seen everything. But if you haven't, I don't think it has any problem because this show is fucking hitting on the things that it needs to hit on. Like it introduces, you to Gambit. It makes you love him in those 4 episodes. If you've never known Gambit before, you loved him by the time he gets murdered. Like
I definitely,
yeah.
I wasn't a huge fan of Gambit from the comics or
Me
the
either.
92 show, and something about the way he's portrayed here, maybe it was really intentional to get us to just be on his side. But I was starting to dig Gambit in ways I did never think, never thought about before. When I was in 9th grade, I had a friend who had Gambit all over their Trapper Keeper and the bag, like they were just obsessed. And I just thought, what is the deal with this Gambit character? I was reading different kinds of comics then. I was more on the DC side, but still, I was just thought, I'm missing out. And now it's like I want to call up that person decades later and say, okay, you were right. Gambit's awesome.
Yeah. I hated him, and I've said that before on the show. I just was not a fan. I thought he was a fake ass long shot and a bunch of other things. I just did not like him, and him getting near Rogue, who is like my favorite woman in all the world, was like the wackest thing ever for me. And then the way he's been portrayed on this, and even in the comics, over the years, I've grown to love Rogue and Gambit, and I loved them together. And like he got murdered in the future in the comics recently. We talked about this on a recent episode, and it devastated me. And then this episode came along and, womp. And so here we are at his funeral to start this one. And yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like the way the show treated Cyclops in the first few episodes too, right? Like Cyclops, a character that in comics, mixed bag. I think a lot of fans don't like Cyclops, who are
haters.
I've always liked Cyclops, but his journey in the comics has been up and down. I think lately a little better, but in the first few episodes, he was awesome. And so I think this show, if there is one thing the show is doing really well, to your point, Ben, about it's hidden, it's the character development and the relationships and all the relational drama. Like that's what the X-Men have, right? Where it's like the relationships, the drama, like all the interpersonal,
the love triangles,
the sex.
It's a soap opera. This is a novella right here going on.
Yes. Hardcore. I always tell people that. Like, I always tell people if you've never read a comic, Chris Claremont, even though it's a little wordy nowadays for, people who aren't readers like that, is one of the best intros to comics ever because it is a fucking soap opera throughout its whole run. And the great X-Men runs are always soap operas. Grant Morrison leans so heavy into that. And then Hickman leans super heavy into it. So, Gillen, Ewing, all the great runs of X-Men to me have always been a soap opera. So this is the same thing. And I really want, before we dive even deeper into the episode, I really want to shout out, because we're on the rewatch and we've talked about it, but the voice actors on this series and, the ones who've carried over, like the woman who's been doing Rogue since the original series, are just doing some, stunning work. Like, we talked about this on an earlier episode, how animation has the ability to go from different moods that it's very difficult to replicate in live action. And for people to accept it, that's what Rodimus Prime said in the earlier episode, that it's very difficult because we haven't been trained to accept that, but animation, we're trained to do it. And the way Rogue in this episode goes from raging to crying to acceptance, like Drea was talking about, all the different levels of grief, is just super impressive work. Just super impressive work. So I just really wanted to Shout out to my L and after playing Kurt Wagner Nightcrawler. Oh my God, just is doing it, like dropping bars at Gambit's funeral, pure bars. But yeah, the episode does open with Gambit's funeral, and once again, this was yet another moment we talked about this before. Where I was like, oh yeah, this Negro is dead, like dead and dead. Like they are doing the funeral, and this makes me think like people talk about he might be featured as one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse. I really hope not. Even maybe it's a last second shot at the end of the season, maybe, but it's been too much of the dealing with grief and all that to cheapen it by just bringing him back. I'm sure the writers will do a great job with it if they do, but I'm really, stunned and appreciative that that he's been dead 3 episodes, and it don't look like he coming back anytime soon.
It seemed like a choice to give us that funeral scene. It's putting the body into the ground. I mean, this is kind of a grim conversation we're having, but for this comic character, and a lot of people will say, hey, in the comics, people, they come back differently. They merge with other identities. All this wild stuff happens. And I think you're right. I don't know that they would put this much effort in the finality of his life ending and how it ended to then cheapen it by bringing him back in this season, at least. So it seems like this is going to be the end of Gambit for this season, at least. And I just really love Nightcrawler so much. I've always been a fan of Nightcrawler. Yes. It's some of the work that I do obviously is about traumatic grief and helping people through, steward them through these transitions, these liminal spaces between life and death, and how we respond to traumatic losses. And for me, at least as a viewer, I felt so comforted by Kurt. Like, he's the person I need to steward me through this sadness. He is that figure. It's almost this sometimes mythical, sometimes alliterative figure who helps us go through one stage to another, one phase to another. And I thought having him lead the procession was really meaningful, and I was just very comforted to see that.
Agreed.
No,
Agreed with that. He was really great to lead that, especially just the conflict, the contradiction that he is, right? Like the Catholic devil is like the conflict we all face internally as we're watching this, but that this show represents. But going back to Gambit, I have to say, I don't know if it's like the comic book nerd in me, but I will be shocked if Gambit doesn't come back. I think probably this season, I think you're right, Dr. Drea, like they'll probably leave it be. But I mean, like we thought, we know Professor X wasn't dead. We know Magneto wasn't dead. Like, this is it? Like, are they really going to do that to Gambit? I think it would be, I'm for it, but I absolutely do not believe it. I don't believe it. In comics, people die and come back all the time. And the fact that we've had Gambit by Marvel Studios for like 4 episodes, and they're going to be like, bold. If they do it, I will absolutely give them the flowers they deserve. But I am saying it right now. I fully expect to see him back in the future.
I think back is relative too. Like for non-comic readers, it would be, there's the option of him coming back as one of Apocalypse's horsemen, where he becomes Death, and he's not really the old Gambit. It's the same thing that happened to Angel and Archangel, and that could be an option. But like you said, Ron, a lot of the people are coming to this from not reading comics, so that's the thing. And the writers knew that going in, that they're not near. It's like when the MCU, they know most of the people watching it are not coming to this from reading comics, so when they put a body in the ground and have a funeral episode, that would really be a lot to just walk back. Even that season for me, I think it would, like Drea said, like I've lost, people. I mean, recently, like both of my parents passed in the last 5 years. So it's been like, dealing with these levels of grief has been personal for me, and seeing, watching media like this. So to me, it would really cheapen it for them to just bring it back. And I really, like y'all said, because last week we talked about this too, because I was at a black wedding recently, and we were talking about how Kurt Wagner would be the perfect person. We also, were debating whether or not Kurt represents blackness, and we've all pretty much agreed on last episode that he does. But him giving the speech at this funeral was perfect, because just last week on the show, we were talking about how him giving a speech at a wedding, a black wedding, would be perfect. And Kurt's speech was just so full of bars. All the things he was saying about Gambit, Gambit's was his modesty was just, oof, it hit. And that's what Kurt is there for. And it's also, as it keeps getting referenced throughout this episode, Kurt is part of this family of Rogue. He's basically Rogue's adopted brother, so Gambit's like his adopted brother-in-law. And they have this relationship that extends beyond the X-Men. And it was so great to see that reference so many times in this episode.
Yeah, it's a true family affair. This show's all about family.
Oh, yeah, so many lines. I really love that Wolverine, when he brought up the Grief's a Lonely War. It's like this episode and this show, I mean, we've always talked about it. We talked about the voice actors. The writing is just so stellar. The way, like you said, Dre, it packs so much into this episode. We open with the, thing with the funeral. It's hard to even talk about it. And then Wolverine, and then all of them reacting to it, and Rogue not being there. And then we immediately cut, like a damn smash cut to Where's Rogue? And Rogue is going ham. And we get to see General Thunderbolt. Thaddeus, isn't it Thaddeus? Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross? I think it's Thaddeus.
Ross, yeah, the guy in the bunker, right?
Yeah, that's he comes from the Hulk comics. He references the Hulk in here. He is
Red Hulk.
He is the Red Hulk. He's one of the Hulk's nemesis from day one, pretty much. He was there at the creation of the Hulk. So he is a longtime Marvel character, and it was great to see him in this. And also great to see him be not racist, but I don't know what you call that. Regionist, I guess, when he references that she's just a swamp mutant. And
oh yeah. Oh, a little anti-South though, right?
Yeah, very anti-South. And also, it's just that it's once again the writers are referencing other things. You know what he wanted to say. Just a swamp. But of course, she is a white woman, so you can't say that's a swamp mutant, which is fine for him in this case. But I'm one of the biggest Rogue fans ever. She was my first character that I fell in love with. Like, one of the first comic books I ever read is her introduction when she joins the X-Men, before she joins the X-Men in Avengers Annual 10, when she steals Captain Marvel's powers for the first time and becomes the Rogue we all know and love. So I've been in love with her from day one. And to see her come in and whoop that ass on these, military white men was just a beautiful day for me. Beautiful.
Yeah, she really reaches a peak here in this episode. There are some choices that she makes that are very bold, and you can tell she's reached a point of beyond anger. And there's something fulfilling about that, especially if you side with her. As I mentioned, there's a number of reactions we see from a number of people. Kurt's reaction, going back to that, one of almost, spiritual acceptance, right? There's something calm about him. She's on the other end of the spectrum. This is full out rage. Like, somebody did something and I'm going to finish this. I'm going to take care of this. Enough is enough. And that level of rage, there's something sort of relatable and cathartic for us as we see this. Like, we're in observation of this, like literal catapulting into this military base, to find the person who wronged her. And it's strangely fulfilling, right? We know it's wrong to be this, to have this level of anger and violence, and at the same time, there's some reason to it, and it makes sense.
See, and I think that's one of the big debates of this episode is tolerance, acceptance, versus resistance, versus not taking it anymore, versus not, sitting down and just being like, oh, okay, that's cool. And I think that thing, like Rogue is going through her grief, and her grief might make her make some bad decisions, but at the same time, her grief is coming from a place where it's been tested, where they've done what, like she says to Ross, you killed the good mutants, you killed the ones who were down with that. Now you left with us. And that's the reality, and that's what we've been talking about on this a lot. And I really love how this, really ties in. And it's one of those things people are gonna be like, oh, this is so timely, but sadly, it's just always the time. There's always a time when, in this world we live in, where people are being oppressed. Like right now in the news, we see, Israel oppressing Palestinians. And so that's become like the big issue. But at all times, as we discussed before, right now, there's also huge issues in the Congo. I mean, every day in America, there's huge issues. So worldwide, there's always oppression going on. So that this episode and this series is tapping into it isn't that it's timely, it's just that it's always happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting permission to also feel upset, to feel angry, to feel helpless, to feel even a sense of numbness to all of it. When we had my show had a panel recently with the showrunners of the original X-Men animated series, and we brought up the concept of how the show lifts up constructs of liberation, and that you see a spectrum of positions and perspectives and activities, from Beast, who's kind of like this passive citizen wanting his due process, believing in the eventual tolerance of mutants, all the way to Magneto's a really bold and violent fight against the system. You've got to break it in order for it to become better, right? And what I love about X-Men 97 is that it continues these concepts of, we're not going to actually tell you the answer. We're not going to tell you what's right. We're going to show you very real reactions and responses to the marginalization and oppression of a whole group of people, and how those groups of people, or that group of people, reacts and responds in different ways in order to find their liberation. And we're not going to tell you what's right, but it's an excellent exercise for all of us who are also struggling with, what is the right way to protest? Are we going to gain freedom and liberty with one way, with a more active way, with an invasive way? How do we get this done? And I think this show continues to raise those questions among us and raise the emotions that go along with those questions.
And it'll be interesting to see how that's resolved going forward, because to your point, Dr. Drea, it's like they're raising these really important issues, and it is all of them, the X-Men are a spectrum of how we would all handle these types of oppressions. But historically, shows that are like from a major studio, right, haven't necessarily handled these very layered and complex issues in the best way. I don't blame them. It's like, this is mass produced, right? This is pop culture for a reason. It's hard to handle it delicately and in the way that it deserves. And one example that I often think about is the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I didn't necessarily enjoy the way that, and the story has not concluded, right? We're going to see more in Captain America 4 and all that, but I didn't appreciate the way Sam's journey and all of that was necessarily handled in that show. We don't have to get into all that, but the point being that it'll be interesting to, circling back, Rogue's actions in this episode have to have worldwide consequences, right? She is attacking a military, highly armed military installation and threatening high-level military individuals. That can't go by. Right? It's all recorded. Her strength is impressive and on display. So that's going to necessitate a reaction from, humans, a violent reaction, as we've seen when in the real world and things like that happen. The, of course, controversial action where she, drops Trask, like that has to have consequences. And so how are they going to handle that? I have to laugh, Ben, you made a great point about, like, this is just a reality. It's not just timely, it's all time. And I think that was reflected a little bit when we see the Shi'ar like talk about Earth And like,
Yeah.
I think like they called it a ghetto or something.
Yes.
You know, they were just like that, like lowly world, because that's where we're at. We're in this era of the world where it's like constant conflict and you know, inhumanity to each other. So I laughed at that moment in the show.
And
No,
it's not subtle
yeah.
when they imply that how one X-Man is seen in the media and by the mainstream, you know, culture. All X-Men are going to be seen that way. So you're sort of getting into the pitfalls of how one person in their own right, feeling how they want to feel, acting how they want to act, now has to contend with, well, you're representing the entire group to the entire world, and this is what you want to show. And Rogue is at a point where she's like, that doesn't bother me, not an issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, like the world is a ghetto, you know, is a whole album by the group War. So that's been a thing. Like we said, like I said, this is not timely. It's that it just always is happening. Like War made that album in 1970. So for the Shi'ar to call us a ghetto right now is not far-fetched. It's like, yeah, sure. Of course it is. Also, Dre, you brought up something that just made me think, because I rewatched the whole or most of the original X-Men. We were talking about this before. And that is wild, like the journey that they're even doing with Beast, because I remember that was on the original series, right? When Beast sits in jail and it's like, oh no, I'll just sit here and wait for y'all to bust me out. I mean, for, you know, due process to happen. And now to the point where he's like, it seems like we're headed down the road for comic readers of the Beast that we know in the current X-Men run, where he starts to do whatever is necessary to save mutant kind. And that involves a lot of treacherous and really down low and dirty shit. And it seems like we're headed down that path from the Beast, who was at one point doing his best to be, you know, the key between human and mutant relations.
Absolutely. He has many moments in the original show where he's showing himself as genuinely interested in due process and in this, however ideal it is, this idea that they can coexist with non-mutants, and a willingness to use even like literal meditation, patience, education, mindfulness, and a strong belief that equality will prevail. And it's interesting that we kind of see that deteriorate in such a like in a long form, because, you know, episodes and seasons later, there's a subtlety to it. He's starting to kind of, you know, change and transition away from that ideology, and he's still himself. I love Beast, actually. I hope there's I actually wanted to see more of him in this episode, where he's interacting with Patricia Tilby, the journalist, who together they have this chemistry, or they've had chemistry. And in this episode, she says a few things that concern him about her true motives and maybe her true feelings about mutants. And there's just these little subtleties that I love in this episode. When she approaches him on Genosha, Beast closes the curtain where we have these survivors, the wounded, the injured, the folks on their, you know, deathbed. He closes the curtain so that, you know, I had to think on this. Is that so she didn't have to see the, you know, the grotesque part of this war? Or is it that there's a camera there and he wanted to protect these mutants behind the curtain? Is, you know, could be multiple things, but just that little subtle move I thought was just so, just so nice to see coming from Beast's psychology. This is a character who thinks about the well-being of everybody. He's such a sensitive, such a highly emotionally intelligent mutant. And he's got this connection with her. And we start to kind of see his sense of just his worldview change a little bit after this, around who he can trust and what the right path is.
Yeah, I love Beast as well, but I was not down for Trisha's shit in this episode. I thought she was purely on that bullshit, like that, you know, let's be patient and chill out shit. Like, bitch, you are standing in a mass grave. And, you know, the time for patience is far from over. I'm sorry, you know, no. So I was not down for her at all in this one. It was that, like you said, it's like the episode, like they're not trying to make you draw a line or, say which side is right. But at the same time, it's like they are standing again in a mass grave and she walks up and it's like, hey, maybe, chill out on the revenge tip or, even on the protesting, just sit there and be quiet. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think she represents like somebody who could have their heart in the right place. I mean, I think we saw that moment of genuine like physical affection towards Beast, right? And there's the moment to Drea's point, like Beast pulls the curtain on the injured, and then also when she comes, she tells the camera person like, go away. Like she's not trying to make a spectacle out of it. And so I appreciated that. But yeah, even despite the fact that she has the best intentions and a genuine affection for Beast, like her perspective is still not necessarily on point, and fully empathizing and really understanding what it's like to be a mutant in that, like you said, Ben, graveyard, like a truly catastrophic event. She's still thinking, like you said, be patient, do the right thing.
Bitch, be cool. No, she's straight. It's like, no. Like I said, I love Beast, I love Trish, but it just was not the time for it. And she was the type of character to me right now who would have voted for Obama 3 times. Like, she's very, and I hate when people dog on liberals and they're like, oh, liberals, I'm like, well, what's the alternative? Conservatives ain't much better. But in this case, I really do feel that, where it's like she has that position of what most modern day liberals would be like, oh no, just wait and chill. And we discussed this before on the series that, like, because I've been discussing this series and that's what I love about it. So I've been talking about it with bad people and just not related to X-Men things. And I was like, well, you take a case of someone like Nat Turner. And when Nat Turner, did his revolt, he murdered mad people, slaughtered them in the middle of the night. It's a gruesome. But Nat Turner was revolting against slavery. What were his options? Sit there and play nice?
This is what Beast is really, opening up to is thinking to himself, maybe processing his own decisions, right? I've done I've sat in jail passively. I've done I've waited for due process. I've, collected and healed my community members. I'm waiting for my justice and it's not coming. And for him to look around at essentially what you said, this graveyard, this massive trauma site, and think, I can't, something's got to change. I can't tolerate this kind of loss anymore. At what point do I need to change my worldview? For someone as, experienced as Beast is, I think that's what we're meant to see. My guess is that we are meant to see that shift in him. And again, they're not going to give us the answers, but just kind of see him dismiss this woman who is essentially being like, calm down, like maybe don't be so loud. It's we all know that person, right?
There's a time and a place.
Yeah, but maybe if you could do this quietly. This is not a quiet war.
Yeah, that's how I needed a second for that one. But also, I really love, like you said, Beast is just such a great character and so many great lines in the episode. I really love him referencing Mr. Rogers' famous quote, look for the helpers, because we've talked about that many times on this show, is that oftentimes in film and media, whenever you see disasters, it's like no one wants to help, it turns into riots, etc. And that's just not numerically the case, historically the case. That's not the case. In every disaster, there's more people helping than there are harming, and it's just not shown in media because that's not exciting. So that was very dope for me. And Mr. Rogers had said that quote way before 9/11, but he definitely referenced it again in 9/11. And so it shows that that's the level of tragedy that the mutants and the world is dealing with in this episode. Like, we see this in this episode, and I thought that was such a great moment when later on, when Rogue is going through it, we see the reactions to this tragedy in Genosha are hitting people who don't even live there. Like, people are having memorials to people who they lost, who, you know, probably had traveled to Genosha for a better life, you know, to realize this dream, to be calm and quiet. And that's the fuck shit. You know, it's like, Tristan's like, yo, be calm and quiet. And that's what they were doing. You know, they were buying $10 apples over there. They were doing their best to, you know, like, live away from shit. They dealing with $10 apples again, just so they don't have to deal with this hate. And then, you know, you still come over there and murder them in mass. So I'm past that calm and quiet. You know, I respect Trish, you know. Sorry for calling you out your name earlier, but nah, man, you wildin'. You out here. Yeah, you out here wildin'.
And that's the story of the X-Men, right? In comics, it's the constant struggle of how do we survive? Do we coexist? Do we dominate?
Yeah.
Do we have Genosha? Do we have Krakoa, Arakko? Like, of course, we know there can never be a solution because the story is ongoing, but also that's the constant struggle. That's the human condition, is that, you know, there will always be the oppressors, and there is no method or form that is acceptable that will allow us. And, you know, as an Asian American, that's something that my community always struggles with, right? Being very white adjacent and like being the model minority, and like, hey, let's behave, let's be appropriate, let's be the ones who don't make, you know, too much noise, and then they'll accept us. And despite all the history to the contrary, but that is the story of the X-Men. And so again, I'm very interested to see how this will be handled going forward, because we need to see how Professor X and Magneto and the team, as it splinters, inevitably there will be splintering and changing sides and all the drama that we've talked about. Like, it's going to be very interesting to see how all that plays out.
Genosha is that kind of like study of a liberation movement, because, you know, I don't know if, is it Leech? It's one of these, sadly, it's one of these characters who thought they had found the experience of liberation, and even your place of sanctuary is violated, and, you know, and made into a war zone. And I don't know if we're meant that in one of those moments of kind of like memorializing some of the fallen X-Men, there's a picture of Leech.
Yo, they did not need to do that.
Just like,
Leech.
oh my God, you really,
they really stuck it to us, like,
they
right there.
Y'all, all right. This is like, as a comic reader, Leech is another one of my characters, dog. Like, I think the very first issue of X-Men I ever read is the issue. It's a famous cover where Wolverine is holding Energizer, one of the members of Power Pack, a maybe 8-year-old girl up, and he's got his claws out, and the rest of Power Pack are flying at her, trying to save her. And it's, you know, I picked that up like, what the fuck is this about? You know, and so I loved it. And Leech is heavily featured in that issue. And then I became a big fan of him, and he's all over Power Pack, and I love that series. Shout out to Louise Simonson, one of the great architects of the X-Men, who doesn't get enough shout outs and love, so I'm giving it to her a lot lately. And, you know, I love Leech, and they really doubled down. Like, no, this man is double dead, nigga. Like,
Leech ain't coming back.
Oh, Leech is not coming back. Let's just say that now.
What I mean. There's no hope for Leech. There's no like, oh, he'll be gonna, you know, like, Apocalypse is not looking at that man and being like, let me make you a horseman. No.
And Leech did nothing to any, like, Leech has not done a thing to anybody. Maybe stole an apple one time.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, they were $10, you know, back to that. And yeah. So they, and Callisto, like, these are characters I love. Callisto, I love Callisto. Like, you know, like, these are my first issues. Oh no, they had memorial to her ass too. She was dead, double dead too. And
I mean, that's a story for the Morlocks, who already said, we have to literally live underground because we can't pass. And for them, for their whole people to be decimated like this is tough. And
this ain't the first time, right? Like, they referenced the Mutant Massacre. I'm not sure that the Mutant Massacre actually happened in the cartoon. Like, did the Morlocks get slaughtered and have to leave their tunnel and then go to Genosha? I don't know if they did that in the original series. That'd be pretty.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember that either. But, you know, and it's still canon for the comics, whatever. And they're in Genosha, so they left the tunnels in New York. So there was a reason for them to leave the tunnels in New York. So they probably got slaughtered more than once. And Damn, I just said that. Yeah. Onto some
R.I.P.
bright
Leech.
spots. Onto some bright spots. Amelia Vaught, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, shows up in this episode. She's in Genosha. She was the doctor who we see turned from vapor. And she was a member of the Alkalites, which is this one of Magneto's, what's the word? Henchmen? Not even cronies. Yeah, cronies, I think they are. And goons. Yeah, goons. That's what they are. They're some of Magneto's goons. But before that, in comics history, she helped form the X-Men with Professor X and dated him, for a time. But because he's a trifling ass, that didn't go right. So there she is, little shout out.
And she's not holding it together.
I mean, would you?
No. Well, she makes a really good point. I actually liked her role here.
Loved it.
She's essentially saying, like, even for the folks helping, like the nurses and the health providers and these folks doing this first response, the first tier after a critical event like this, she makes a comment about whether even surviving is worth it, given the amount of pain that she's in, the amount of emotional pain that she's in. And I thought that, again, this is an animated show, and they're really telling us all the different pieces and parts of what happens after a trauma like this. Somebody had mentioned to me that this Genosha event sort of divides the season into two parts, and it's almost like a 9/11 event. And after that event, you will see the, echoes, the aftermath, the echo trauma that happens following this big global, trauma. And we may never be able to mentally kind of get back to where we were in the first half of the season. So it's meant to pivot us into the different storytelling. But it did so in such a very real way with all these different perspectives.
Ron
said he'll be right back.
Oh, okay. Well, then on that note, what you were saying is something I really definitely fully appreciate and understand. I think this, because I'm at a different stage in my grief, even though grief is one of those things where you go back and forth through all these different stages. And I've really been there. Like, for a time after my mother passed and then my father passed last year, for a time after both of them, it was just, I could not see a point in going on. Like, I just felt like, what is the point in doing anything when I felt like a lot of my life I was always doing things to make them happy or make them proud. And then it was just like, what's the point? I don't have my mom who I talk to all the time. Like, it just felt weird. Like, it was like, why do anything? And it was a real struggle for me to do anything for those years and throughout the years. And so that's something that I just really appreciate the show for what it's doing, for how grown it is. And I've talked about that on Twitter and stuff. Is like, I really hope that everyone, not just adults who grew up on the first series, but kids as well are watching this, because it really is doing the work and showing these themes in a relatable way that I feel that anyone can digest, and it's not too adult where they can't watch it. So
maybe older kids, maybe not too.
I mean, I was watching Robotech, man, at like 7. So, I saw Roy Fokker get shot and then come home to his woman and die in front of her. So, I don't know, and Akira followed me at like 11.
Oh, wow.
So.
Oh, man, Akira.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
That is intense.
Yeah, well, anime manga is kind of a different animal, but.
Yeah, but Roy Fokker, I mean, Robotech was like, and then Robotech had, Roy Fokker's in an interracial relationship. So Roy Fokker was fucking me up as a kid, and then he gets killed. I love Roy, and then it's like, no, this is life. All people you love will die. And
well, so what you just said is so important when it comes to media engagement. People wonder. You look at your Captain America shield and the comics behind you, and people may wonder, like, what is really the purpose of all of this, this connection that we have. And what you just said is really where it's at. There's such a meaningful and available emotional connection to these characters and to these stories. And when we engage with media like this, it does help us heal. It gives us a narrative. It gives us language. It gives us some even emotional modeling. And all of us are going to find someone in there. Maybe it's Beast. Maybe it's Nightcrawler. Maybe it's Jean Grey. Maybe it's, one of these, maybe we feel like we're kind of in the background there, but we are, what's the guy that can multiply man?
Jamie Madrox.
Multiple man.
Yeah, Jamie Madrox, the multiple man.
Lots of him there. But it helps us to kind of wrestle with the uncertainty and the unexplained. And it just, it gives us that moment to just process that. And that's really sophisticated stuff. Is it for children? I think that it really depends on what they're seeing. Some of the stuff they may not even pick up on. And some of the stuff when they're older, they'll realize, oh, that's what that meant. Why did he close that curtain? Now I get it. Now I get what he was trying to do.
Yep. No, definitely. Yeah, I don't know. That is a debate. Like, I definitely grew up watching a lot of things, that probably maybe I shouldn't have seen, but at the same time, it was informative and it did help me. And then, like you say, these things, seeing stuff like this, like the people have been referencing the Pulse nightclub shooting, 9/11, all those different things. But at the same time, it's also so great about very personal things. Like I was talking about, like the loss of my parents. I can definitely relate to this because it's that loss of one person. The loss of Leech. Like people, it goes back to even what the Joker said in The Dark Knight, when it's a bunch of people, you're like, oh, whatever. But when it's someone that's when it hits you. And so that's why I really love this show and how it's, showing all these different facets of it and all these different sides. And then it also has what Ron is talking about, like all these different sides to resistance. And it relates to all these different areas where it's like all these different people. Like, Ron, as you said, as an Asian American, and me as a Black American, it's like we have different, histories and cultures and things of that nature, but we also have things we relate to on the same thing. And we are all being pretty much oppressed by this same, toxic whiteness and this culture that we all exist in.
Mm-hmm. So. This fight for power. It's something that you said also lifts up the concept of like someone's identity development as they work with being a mutant. And this is all through the lens, the perspectives, and the friendships that Jubilee has. And we see, even in this jam-packed episode, there's also a scene in here about, what's her boyfriend's name?
Roberto. Sunspot.
Yes. He essentially comes out to his mom, and initially, mom is like, oh, honey, we knew this whole time. We're just waiting on you to be ready. And you have a sigh of relief. And then she says, yeah. And now how do we keep this private? No one's got to know about this. And you're just like, God damn it. Like,
I have so many questions about that scene. Like,
are there questions? I mean, it's pretty.
No, my big question is, like, how the hell does she think that they gonna keep it quiet when this man walked in there with a member of the X-Men in full costume with her her earrings that say Jubilee on them? And
she said, "You're one of the X-Men." She knew. Yes, she knew. She's like, "I recognize you." Yeah. Well, I mean, but you make a good point, because how are we going to keep this private? I don't know. Violence? Like, what?
Money, I guess. I mean, those are the options right there.
Right. This is a very powerful figure. I'm not sure how much we'll get into it in the next few episodes. His family comes from notoriety and wealth, and they are very well recognized. There's no way that this mom is going to let her child, mess with their reputation. So this is such a powerful scene. And, again, there's no subtlety to it. The family dynamic is right in our face. And we see the reactions of these young folks so proud and boldly, um, coming forward with their identities and, being authentic in who they are and saying, all we need is your acceptance. And it's like a double-edged sword. You'll get my acknowledgement, but you won't have my acceptance.
Mm. And then also, while it's like, that's something about this show that we talked about before as well, that I don't want to say bothers me, but sometimes I'm like, damn, this shit is heavy-handed. But then I also am like, well, damn, this show needs to be heavy-handed because people just don't get it. And then even while it's being heavy-handed, like you said, this scene is very direct, very upfront. The family dynamics are very established. It's also subtle in its way. Like the butlers tell them non-alcoholic drinks will be served for you. Non-alcoholic spritzers for you kids. Your mom's having wine in the afternoon, though. Soon as she walks in, she guzzles that joint. As soon as they walk in, she guzzles her glass of wine, then lays down the law to them, and then it's like, spritzer for you little kids, because I just told you as an adult what's going to happen here.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. She's probably self-medicating.
You think?
Well, she's got this like high-rise, they have this high-rise home or condo or whatever, and she's surrounded by these windows. It's clearly not near 5 o'clock. It's like 11 a.m.
Yeah, early in the morning, and she is getting faded and drank that whole glass. And the servants are like afternoon wine, like it's no problem. This is the daily operation around here. So, no, definitely self-medicating. Definitely drama with the father, who in the comics is usually a bit of a scumbag. So
yeah, I like that. I like this one. Again, I mentioned it's a soap opera. This is one storyline that's going to take us through the drama of this family. But surrounding this conflict is again a reminder of what it's like to be a mutant in this world. This is a character who can actually pass, or at least now can work through foregrounding different characteristics and features that don't tell people right away. It's not like Beast. I talk about this a lot on the Arkham Sessions. Like, you've got someone like Beast who's like not even wearing a shirt because he's like, why?
I'm a blue furry, I'm 400 something pounds probably. I'm a monster by all appearances.
Nothing you can put on him to deny that. And then you've got other characters. You have characters like Morph who can actually manipulate their physical features, and then you have characters who can foreground certain features and therefore navigate through this very segmented, oppressed system in ways that, look, he actually is privileged. This is a kid that comes from a privileged family, and he's like, I'm not going to give that up. Why would I do that? Why would I give up this level of benefits to then identify with a group of people that are being persecuted? And it's again, for us, an exercise in, what about that? There are people who can do that. And are they in service to their peers, to their community members? How can they be in service to their community members? And I think that's, another part of the narrative that helps us think about some of these themes in our lives.
No, it really is. And I think it's something that the showrunner even had to defend Sunspot being so light-skinned on this show. And that's something that has been an issue with Sunspot's character throughout the comics, throughout his history, is that he's consistently been portrayed lighter and lighter since he was first introduced, where he was definitely an Afro-Latino. There was no doubt about it. And then as he gets lighter and lighter, it's been an issue. But I think that's works, especially in this series, as you were talking about, because Sunspot is the character who can pass. And so it makes it like a case for a representation of a lot of things. And I think one of them is like queerness, where it's like there are people who can just, be like, no, okay, I don't have to, represent my queerness to the world, and I can just go about my day. And that's what his mom is asking him to do. While there are people like Beast, who Beast more represents someone like, I talked about this before, like I'm one of the people who, like, when it comes to white people with dreads, they can just cut their dreads off and have a normal, white person life. While me, if I cut my dreads off, I'm still a black person. And that's where Beast is at on the spectrum. Beast is like, no matter what I do, I'm still Beast. While his mom, Sunspot's mom was like, you don't have to be Sunspot. And Sunspot is going to probably lean the way where he's like, no, I have to be Sunspot. This is who I am, and you're wrong. And my friends over here are representing that. Well, at least I hope.
He's got to find his way. Yeah, that's a different journey.
You never know. Yeah. Because Sunspot's drawn both ways in the comments as well. So,
yeah. Well, and again, that represents a segment of mutants that have that choice. And so it really layers on really important concepts. Like, you meet one mutant, you haven't met them all. Like, you cannot generalize and stereotype based on the one mutant that or have met. And that's what this third character in the story is, always the media. And since the comics, right, media has been this other force of the system that's in a lot of ways villainizing X-Men, mutants rather, and showing the worst of the worst. Sabretooth ransacking the city and going through and creating chaos and destroying buildings and breaking windows and, breaking into establishments. That's the mutant that the news is going to show. And so then people develop these ideas and these, widely generalized concepts about mutants that are just false. But that's what the media wants to do, right? And I think that it's, we see that in this episode too. There's always the constant lens or the constant figure of the media trying to shapeshift what the story is. And that's a very sophisticated idea. I don't know if a lot of kids are going to pick up on that, but I think a lot of adults pick up on, there's a camera showing us the war zone or the conflict or, these groups of people. How are they going to tell this story?
Well, I think that also, it comes up, I think, like we said, there's a lot of things that, where a kid watching this isn't going to get it, but when an adult watches it, they're going to get it. Like the conversation between Cyclops and the president is such a reflection of, what we see every day, where a president, and we're in an election year this year, so it really hits home, where a president is going to do or say whatever they can to stay elected, and their excuse is going to be, well, I'm the better of two evils. And Scott's like, look, you're both evil to me. And it just, yet another classic line in this show is my man talk about the optics of the situation when he's talking to a man who shoots optic beams out of his eyes. Just pure classic right there. So, it's all reflected in, like you said, there's a lot of things that the kids won't get that the adults will get. And I think that's intentional, obviously, and I think it works in the show's favor. And it's just one of the strengths of it. And like you said, we were talking about this before the episode started, where I was like, I'm not the biggest fan of the original series, but I think it was more the limitations that the original series had, because as we're talking about it, they had Beast going through those things, and I remember watching it, I was like, Beast is such a sellout, at the beginning of the show. I'm like, what, this clown talking about due process and shit. And you are a blue beast. Like, ain't no due process for you ever, dog. Ain't no due process for me. And I'm at least human looking like, fam, you got no chance. So, but now, seeing his growth and seeing the subtleties of all that is really nice. And knowing what they were working with, them even showing that, like you said, they were showing all the different sides. Here's Beast, a dude who obviously don't look human, but he's trying his best to make it work. And,
they even tried to break him out. Magneto busted through that prison, and Beast was like,
he's like, no, I'm good. That's when I was like, I'm done with this. I
Is that when you're like, no way.
Peace out, bro. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't.
There's something, and I had a different reaction. I think for me there was something quite resilient about that. But again, it's because of the strong-held belief, this willingness to believe in a system that is just. And because Beast is so well-read and so intelligent and has studied so well, there's this part of his brain that believes that, at some point we can reach this, like, you know, I'm about to be on trial for something that I'm not responsible for. There's a sense of, for me at least, this relatable sense of like, if I just educate myself and access all the information that white folks have, if I just get the letters after my name, if I just gain access to the spaces and buildings and positions, get me in the room, you know, like, I'll make them believe me. And, you know, Beast is going through that in the beginning of his experience with, in these phases of the mutant liberation movement. And for that, I was really rooting for him. And this was commendable to some degree, right? And then we see him actually in the original series fall and fail and be wronged despite his good intentions and his goodwill, in contrast to a person like Magneto, who takes matters into his own hands and who uses his power to gain access to the things that I just described, right? So it's you know again, they're all finding these different ways to reach the point, the simple level, the simple wish to exist. And that is an ongoing, as you said, an ongoing story that we continue to tune in for, because we are also looking for those answers.
No, and it's all those things that you just talked about, we've talked about before. Like, I talked about how last episode was really a big episode about Professor X and Storm just trying to see, you know, what it would be like to be white, you know, and maybe we can just give this all up and give up this struggle, and realizing that that's not their life and that's not how it is. But both of them having been on the front lines through all of this makes it relatable. And it's one of those feelings that, you know, pretty much everybody on the panel last week agreed that we've all had at some point. You know, damn, it would just be a little bit easier. And then this episode has, you know, you dealing with those same type of things. Like you're saying, like, all of us at some point have related to Beast. We've all been like, man, if I just do it right, you know, they'll get me. And no, fam, that's not what it is. But we all had to go through that journey.
Absolutely. So, and I love that concept y'all talked about with Storm, especially this. I know Storm actually isn't in episode 7, I don't think, at all.
No.
But in the recent episode had to go through this journey of what it was like to not have her powers, and to feel like that was basically self-erasure. That wasn't necessarily about this outside force. Yes, it has something to do with it, but this whole process of learning how to love herself, weakness, and you know, mental illness and powers, and all the entirety of what it means to be Storm, and how powerful it is to come out of that and realize, what I'm not going to do anymore is dream up of this self-erasure or actively self-erase in order to be fitting in order to be like anybody else, in order to, you know, again, like we're talking about, to gain access to the things that she like any person would want access to.
And I've had to go through that journey even recently in life, where I had to accept that, you know, with Hollywood and things of that nature, I was like, well, do I want to play the games? Do I want to just not say how I feel, you know, so I can get ahead? And I accepted, nah, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just say whatever the fuck I feel and let the dice, you know, cards, whatever, fall where they may, because I'd much rather just be who the hell I am and always say what I feel is right than try and play the role to get further ahead in this world that at the same time isn't going to reward you even when you play that role. So
that struggle that you said, I think, is also something that it's important to just name too, right? And I think the panel in the last episode covered that there are going to be times when we're playing around with, and rightly so, just sort of experimenting with the code switching and with highlighting certain parts of ourselves and speaking. I do it all the time, speaking in certain ways, trying to kind of shapeshift into a person who is agreeable, who's a person pleaser, who's, you know, kind of meeting these different categories of things that I think people want from me. And, you know, when I work with young people who struggle with this too, around their identity and how to be authentically themselves, and yet also trying to fit in at the same time, which is which is often, unfortunately, the way to succeed. This whole idea of self-erasure, something that comes up is the guilt of the of sort of manipulating or, showing different parts of your identity in ways that does not feel authentic. For what? For advancing yourself, for being visible, for getting access to things that you don't normally have access to. And, I tell them it's okay. It's okay even to do those things. We shouldn't feel guilty for that. This is about survivorship. And we don't know the right way to do it, but we certainly shouldn't feel badly for trying to.
Mm. No, and something you talked about earlier that so hit me very much is when you talk about the numbness that comes from this. And I deal with that a lot because right now, two of the biggest issues that I know about worldwide, at least, are with the situation in Congo and the situation in Palestine. And in Congo, I just feel like I don't know what to do because everyone uses the technology that they're exploiting to death, that they're exploiting these people to death over there, and it just seems hopeless. And it seems like no one's really paying attention. And I also know why, because the people there are darker skinned, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just also at the same time happy that there's all this attention being paid to Israel and Palestine, because I know this is an issue that I had to come up on my Facebook feed where it's like, oh, here's your 10-year anniversary of this post. And it was 10 years ago where I was making a point about how Israel ain't shit. And I'm like, God damn, you know what I mean? And I remember my sister talking about it when we were kids. So this has been like, just forever thing. And I know it goes back before my birth, obviously. And it's just one of those things where I'm just happy to see all this attention being paid to it. But at the same time, me as someone who works in this industry, I'm often like, fuck, how much can I say about it? And I just bought 2 t-shirts that I'll be wearing on the show recently that are pro-Palestine. And I mean, not recently, I'll be wearing them very soon. And I speak about it a lot. And I know that it can be detrimental to my so-called career or whatever. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't give a shit. Because who cares about that type of stuff? When there's much more important things, and we have this platform to discuss them. So that's what we're here for. A couple more points I want to make about this episode before we get up out of here. I really loved it, like say, all of those subtle things. There's this shot of Rogue flying through some angel wings when she's on her way to confront Gyrich, who is basically the devil, and he's up in this heaven, type prison. So it's all those really subtle things that were just really dope. Gyrich getting murdered is something, I've hated this dude my whole life, honestly. Like, ever since I started reading X-Men, I've hated him. And he got murdered in the comics recently, and it was like, after all this time of him being around, he finally got murdered. I don't know if he ever did before that. That was my first time remembering it. And then seeing him getting done off in this episode was,
And again, not subtle, very, very clearly. We didn't necessarily, that was Bastion, right? We didn't necessarily see, I think it wasn't until the end of the episode we fully saw who that was.
Yeah, it was him. Yeah.
But we saw how he killed Gyrich, and it was pretty brutal.
And very Tarantino-esque. And that's something that comes up later on. I tweeted this morning. I felt like the music with the purple people eater coming up is very Tarantino-esque, where you have this music that does.
Tell me, what is that association? Because that music came up a couple times.
Yeah, but the music comes up twice, and Tarantino bit of it. Well, what made me think Tarantino, and then the music really solidified it. But the later scene with Bastion and Magneto, when he's shaving him, is, to me, and he turns on the music, because I didn't realize that the music could come on when he was choking dude out as well. But when he's shaving him, it gave me the scene from Reservoir Dogs when Mr. Brown, I can't remember which of the Michael Madsen's character, is torturing the police officer with a straight edge razor, and he's playing Stuck in the Middle with You, which is, the song just doesn't really fit the scene. And it's that same type of feeling that I was getting from this scene. And so when you had this weird music, incongruous, I think is the word for it, where it just doesn't really fit right, that's the Tarantino-esqueness of it.
Yeah, it kind of gives you this unsettling feeling.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think in the second, I don't know, I can't remember the first when we first hear it, but that second time we hear it, it is diegetic. So it's music that's meant to be played. It's listened to by the characters in the scene, and we also hear it. So there's something
both times.
Okay. So there's something to that about I don't know if it's an effect that character wants to create. Again, it's really unsettling and weird. You know, you kind of just have this heebie-jeebie feeling about it. But now that tracks about Tarantino.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it is that same type of, like you said, the diegetic thing, because in the first scene when he's choking him out, there's a operatic scene playing on the radio. And then as he begins to choke him, the radio turns to the music. And then when he finishes up, the radio turns back to the other song. And then when you see him with Magneto, it's like he has a jukebox and he intentionally plays the song before he starts messing with Magneto. And that goes back to the Reservoir Dogs, where he turned to the radio station and is like, "Don't you love this radio station? It plays all the jams," and then begins torturing this dude.
Yikes.
Yeah. A couple of moments that I just got to shout out was Rogue saying, "Honey, this ain't that sort of probe," but did something for me. I can't lie.
You like that?
You know, I was like, "Wow, Rogue." You know, I didn't realize that line would hit me the way it did, but it really did. And then talk about like the joys of animation when in that final fight when Morph is fighting the Prime Sentinel, and the Prime Sentinel hits him. And well, first you have the cameo of Quicksilver, which is just so fire, and Morph using the powers of Quicksilver to attack the Sentinel. But then when the Sentinel hits him back, he like knocks the Morph off of him, like the white skin of Morph comes flying off him like liquid, and it's those little bits of things that happen in the animation that I just love to death. So.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That scene, I don't know a lot about this sort of new Sentinel. It's like a person who's a zombie that is created into this Prime Sentinel, incredibly powerful villain, and I guess created by Bastion. Is that what we're supposed to understand?
Yes. Oh God. I didn't want to do this too much because, like Ron was saying before, he had to jet unexpectedly. Bastion's history is so wild, and we've been doing these trying to breaking down the history of these characters for people who don't read the comics. I don't know if they're going to go with this route on this series, but Bastion in the comics is a character who, and they did make a bit of a reference to it in this episode, is there's this character Nimrod who comes from the future. Nimrod is like the greatest Sentinel of all time. He comes from the future. It's kind of a Terminator type story, and he comes back to eliminate certain characters so his future will happen and he can continue being the great Sentinel mutant killer that he is. But in the comics, Nimrod and the Master Mold, which we've seen in this story, the Sentinel Maker, the big giant Sentinel mates other Sentinels, get thrown into this thing called the Siege Perilous. And the Siege Perilous is basically a dimensional portal that when you get thrown into it or go into it, you get reborn as yourself, but different, kind of. And so the X-Men all go...
It merges the bodies, but only one identity comes out of there.
Well, no other characters went through it at the same time like Nimrod and Master Mold. So it was kind of like, at the time, I think it was more like we're getting rid of these characters for the time being, because I think that was pushed around Paramount's intention. And then later on, they both came back as Bastion. And I think that was another writer by that point. So that wasn't even his original story. Who knows what his intention was? But that's what happened. And all the X-Men went through the Siege Perilous, and they basically came out different. This is when Psylocke went from being a white woman to the Japanese ninja that we all know. And other things happened to the various X-Men. The biggest change was for Psylocke. Storm came out as a child and then eventually came back to normal size. Psylocke was the only one where it really stuck and it became the character that we know. So, but that's how, yeah, and that's how Bastion was created. So I do not think that's how they're going to go here, that Bastion was Nimrod and got thrown into a portal. That's something you would have had to show in we haven't ever seen that happen. But they do make reference that he is a character who evolved from one of the old villains. And when Rogue grabs Dierich, you see Nimrod, a quick flash of Nimrod. And when he talks about you can't get past him, you get a quick flash of Nimrod. So there is going to be something where Bastion is this character who has evolved from Nimrod. And we also see that at the very end of the episode when he's shaving Magneto, but I think his intention for Magneto is to turn Magneto into one of these prime sentinels that we've seen already in this episode.
That's what's happening there with the shaving?
Yes. That's what it took me on my second watch. I was like, why is he shaving this dude? What's that about? But then he's like, you're born to do this. All you need to do is sit back and be quiet, which was also some wild shit to tell Magneto. And it's like what this whole episode keeps talking about. It's like, sit back, be quiet, and just let this happen. But to tell Magneto that, who's seen the results of what happens when a people sit back and just let something happen and think things are going to get better. You know, he's seen his people slaughtered before like that. And now he's seeing it happen again. And for Bastion to tell him that, it's just some like wild, you know, some cold work, boy, right there. I mean, he said, sit, listen, and obey. And you're born for this.
The whole time when you were talking about Bastion in the comics, I kept thinking about that movie with Angela Bassett and James Spader where they merge. Don't they like merge into one? Oh, they do. Supernova. They actually end up not merging into one person, but they are in a, oh, I'm going to get this so wrong. They're like in a spaceship, but there's only one pod, so they have to get together. And then one ends up with one eye. Like Angela Bassett ends up with like a blue eye or something. It's just, why? You got to look it up.
I've got to see this now.
It's like a sci-fi movie from the 90s.
I remember it. I just did not know this is how, you know, it's one of the movies I didn't see, so I did not know that's how, you know, it ended or how it went at all in it, but
I just gave away the ending, sorry, but yeah, they both survive by sort of merge. It's like their DNA has to merge and then like separate again. I've only seen it one time.
Sex Lies and Videotape, James Spader?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah.
The Blacklist, Blacklist, James Spader. Yeah, wow.
It's an interesting story. Well, I do. That's all I kept thinking about. I
think about The Fly. So, you know, you're going for a better one because I think about, you know, the grossness of The Fly whenever that Siege Perilous story gets brought up is what I think about. So,
well, yeah. I do want to end with this concept of time travel that what we know, and this is true in our lives, if there is anything that is going to liberate us from traumatic grief, it is time travel. And what I mean by that is when we future orient ourselves, when we forecast what life is going to be, and you've been doing this, you've been in various phases of grief. We do a couple of things. We forecast a future that doesn't exist. These are the alternate realities in our future. What is life going to be like in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? We call it like a cognitive exercise, an emotional exercise. And we also do some time travel with our past. What would things be? This is actually called counterfactual thinking. When we go back to our past and rewrite the narrative, how would this have been different if I did this, if I took a different action, if I told that person, don't go that way, if I made an effort to try to save them, all these different alternate realities that we create in our past and in our future. And what X-Men is going to do, which I'm just predicting because it's X-Men, is they're going to take us into the different times, into different those different places in the timeline to make sense of the trauma. Now, we know from the Endgame and Infinity War and things like that, that doesn't necessarily make the trauma go away, but it's going to help us rewrite a story that's going to make sense for our characters. And that is what I'm hoping for with the next 3 episodes. We're going to wrap this up with some mad, like amazing time travel story.
I'm really like wondering where we're going, you know, knowing that the series is already season 2 is already pretty much finished, you know, other than like animation, I think at this point, and then they're already planning out season 3. and probably beyond that now with the success of the show. I'm really wondering where they're going in these next 3 episodes. Because the next 3 episodes are called Tolerance for is Extinction, or because I know it references the E for Extinction.
Wait, the
series.
the Operation Zero Tolerance?
Yes, yeah. It's the name of the 3 episodes are a reference to E for Extinction, which was Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men, where Genosha first gets destroyed. So, but Genosha's already been destroyed at this point. So where they're going in these next 3 episodes, obviously, like you said, we're gonna have Cable there. We're gonna have some time.
You got to do something with Cable. It's now 2 or 3 times we've seen him.
Bastion, has been hinted at since pretty much early on. Like we saw, the first time we see Bastion, as far as I can remember, we see actually someone. Well, he's at the you see him at the gala before it gets destroyed. He's one of the people in the background. And he was also on Forge's wall in a picture with Forge.
Right.
Yeah. So that's going to have to get resolved. And, where he comes from and how he knows Forge is going to have to get explored. You also have Professor X coming back to Earth. And
they've got to bring that back and resolve that.
And we were talking about this last week. Is that going to lead into an Onslaught type storyline where Professor X and Magneto have been pushed to their limit and form this, evil being? Or are we leading towards like a Krakoa storyline where the X-Men get fed up with everything and just go off on their own? But they've already kind of did that with Genosha in this. And bringing up Krakoa with this living island would be a lot of storyline to cover in 3 episodes that I don't think is really going to happen right now. I think that might happen maybe in season 3 or something. So I'm not 100% sure where we're going in these last 3 episodes. I think, like you said, the most logical answer is some time travel hijinks. I just really hope that we don't do Gambit had to die so that, it's a wonderful life type of thing. Like, I really hope we don't do that. But at the same time, I hope they don't bring him back in some time travel hijinks in the next 3 episodes either. So it might have to be some of that, Gambit had to die because this is how life goes. Which I hate because that's one of the things of grief that I've had to deal with, and that's something that I've often discussed throughout my life. Something that I've been obsessed with in my life is like choices and fate, and whether or not we are fated to do things, or it's just just basically how reality works. It's something I've been obsessed with, and what our choices lead to, and things of that nature. And like you said, if I'd done this, could I have saved that person? If only I'd done this, would that person still be here? And something I've always accepted is that, everything does happen for a reason. And if you think that way, then you have to accept that all these things have happened and they are what it is. One of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got in my life was, Benjamin, whenever you hear the word if in your head, that's just the devil talking to you. Because there is no if, there's just is, there is this. And so I think that's something that, people dealing with grief definitely have to deal with and probably can relate to. So
that's real. It gets us into trouble. Too many ifs will get you into trouble, emotionally, mentally. Absolutely. That's good advice.
I was given to me straight up when I was sitting in prison with someone. So it was taken well.
That's that with you. Yeah.
It's hard to not take it at that point. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Drea, for joining me on this episode of For All Nerds. Please let the people out there know where they can find you at.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to process the X-Men trauma with you. I'm such a huge fan of the show. For folks who maybe want to do a deep dive in the original X-Men animated series, I'm hosting the Arkham Sessions. It's a podcast actually that started all about Batman, the animated series, and the psychology of those characters. And now we're covering X-Men, the animated series. We're still in the first season. Come join us. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can find me, Dr. Drea Psychology, on Instagram, the Arkham Sessions on Instagram. Come say hi. We'd love to hear from you. And again, thanks for having me. These are awesome conversations, and I'm happy to be included.
Oh, no, thank you for joining us. If you ever need a guest on the Arkham, please let me know. I'd love to because I actually, chewed through most of the original joint. So I'm, it's all in my head. So I'll definitely be down for that. Big shout outs to Ron from POC Culture. They had an emergency as well where he had to dip out. So thank you for joining us, Ron. Make sure you check him out on Instagram, on Twitter. POC Culture is doing that work just like the For All Nerds show. We are big fans of theirs over here. So thank you for joining us. And as always, you can find me all over the interwebs, everywhere, at DJ Ben Amin on everything, at For All Nerds on everything. Like we talked about earlier, we got a new shirt design coming soon. The Magneto is right. ForAllNerds.com will be back very soon, where you'll be able to pick up all of our designs, from the Gucci Mandalorian to Magneto is right to everything else that we're doing. And as always, before I get out of here, make sure y'all go check out Jimi Hendrix Purple Haze. The original graphic novel will be on sale August 15th, but you can still pre-order it right now. Hit up Anyone Comics, doesn't matter wherever you are. We still have a few more signed copies going up out of there, so hit up Anyone Comics. They will ship it to you anywhere. And more details on the signings, after parties, all that stuff coming soon. Yeah.
Woo.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and we out of here. I really forgot to talk about Emma's diamond form, but it is what it is.
Hey, what's up, internets and the fan fam? This is Tatiana King for All Nerds, and I want to thank you so much for listening and watching the For All Nerds. Make sure you like and subscribe to us only on YouTube.